Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. And today's episode is Bleach Soul Society, the Sneak Entry Arc, episode 27, Release the Death Blow. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So basically, the episode begins with Rukia in the Tower of Penance, noting that she's not able to feel any spiritual energy outside of the tower, but that she did see the bright light yesterday, and wonders if it really could be Ichigo. We then also have a Squad 4 character that does show up quite frequently in the arc, Hantaro Yamada, who is bringing food for her. However, he didn't know that she had already been moved, and he's almost bowled over by a bunch of the other squads who are going out to try to find the Ryoka in order to fight them. We then pick up with Ichigo versus Ikkaku, and we basically have their battle continuing. Ichigo catches up to the speed of Ikkaku and realizes more about the dynamic nature of his weapon and is able to overcome it, winning the fight and wounding Ikkaku's shoulder, followed by his arm, making him unable to continue. Ikkaku, of course, passes out. Ichigo uses the ointment that was in the handle of his Zanpakuto to stop the bleeding on his forehead wound, as well as stop Ikkaku's wounds. And then, of course, when Ikkaku wakes up, he's surprised he's alive, realizes Ichigo is there, and Ichigo basically asks him for the location of Rukia, and he gives him the location, not believing that he's actually going to be able to save her. In fact, laughing so hard at it that he ends up reopening his wound a bit, and then warns Ichigo that his squad's captain is a fight maniac and is going to be looking for the strongest of Ichigo's group. And if Ichigo is the strongest in his group, that's basically warning him he's going to be after him. We then get a little bit of a check-in with Ishida and Inoue, and they're, of course, trying to be sneaky, but then Ishida tells, Inoue to get behind him because somebody's passing by, and then she takes it on herself to go scouting and leads a whole group back to them, which then they have to run, and they end up running away from a large crowd of Shinigami. Chad, who's over on a branch, sees the smoke cloud from the stampede of Shinigami that are chasing them and goes over knowing that it will be one of his friends, either Ichigo, Inoue, Ishida, etc. So he starts moving. We then also check in with Kenpachi and Yachiru, who Kenpachi's following Yachiru's um, directions that she's creating following her intuition, and they reach at least two dead ends within the episode, so her intuition isn't that great, but she accuses him of having a terrible sense of direction, which is why they're not able to find anybody, and then we do see that they are quite far from anything, really, so completely lost. And then the last little bit that's in there is, of course, Ganju and Yumichika's battle, if you want to call it that, is still ongoing. He basically is being chased still, and Yumichika asks him how long he's going to run, and he says until you give up. Then he uses a chili smoke bomb, except it ends up impacting him as well, so then they both fall into a garbage dump, and then, of course, he has to climb out, he gets chased, and that's still ongoing. When will it end? We do not know, but it wasn't this episode. And that's basically everything that happened in this episode, though not necessarily in the order that it happened in the episode. And so now we can rank the episode on our two ranking lists. We rank on our mostly objective ranking list, followed by the personal ranking list. So We had our multi-arc supporting character introduction, and that, of course, was Hantaro Yamada, who is on Squad 4, which is a squad that's looked down on and does the chores, it would seem, as that is what is implied when he is being basically stampeded by a bunch of the other Shinigami as they're going out to look for Ichigo and crew. And then he is so low on the totem pole that even though he was the one assigned to bring food to Rukia, nobody bothered to inform him that Rukia was already moved. So it's kind of a shock to him. So shocking, in fact, that he ends up dropping his tray of food and he comes off as very timid, a very timid character. And he's worth 3 points. And then we also had 2 points for a resolved battle, which of course was Ikaku and Ichigo resolving their battle. And that made this a 5 out of 10 mostly objective ranking episode. So on our arc ranking so far for our mostly objective ranking, we have Enter the World of the Shinigami, The Man Who Hates Shinigami, Assemble the Gotai 13, Formation, The Worst Tag, 14 Days Before Rukia's Execution. This episode, Release the Death Blow, is in 6th place. And then in 7th, we have Penetrate the Center with an Enormous Bombshell. And I'm still too immature to say it without chuckling. Bringing us now to my personal ranking of the episode. Now, first the positives. I like that we got to check in on everybody and see where everybody else was. I like that at least one of the battles was resolved because when they drag on too long, it can start to get a little bit repetitive and boring. I do like the comedy in Ganju and Yumachika's battle, which is still ongoing. How, he brags about his chili bomb, but then ends up falling prey to it himself, which is great. And then before they fall into the dump, he's grabbing onto the edge, and then Yumachika grabs onto his um fanny pack. I don't actually know what they're called. Where I'm from, they're called fanny packs, but grabs onto his fanny pack that's on his back and is like, "Don't you dare stop, like drop me into this." And then of course when he does, Yumachika blames him for dropping him into the garbage. How dare he? And then of course Ganjo immediately starts running again, Yumachika following. So that was always fun. I did also, okay, so in the first arc, almost exclusively, every wound that was received tended to be a shoulder wound. And it was this really big highlight where I was counting, well, I wasn't actually counting them, but I was calling out every time there was a shoulder wound. And I felt like in this second arc, that was a bit void. Like they've started to wound people in different places, like foreheads and arms. And so it was a bit disheartening because I found great enjoyment at calling out the abundance of shoulder wounds. So I was very pleased to see that one of the wounds that Ikaku received before his final wound, the first wound that Ichigo really landed, was of course a shoulder wound. Love that they've brought that back. Um, and then the wound that actually took him out was an arm wound, but we got the shoulder wound, which I felt was very nostalgic because we haven't gotten one in a while, or at least it doesn't feel like we've gotten one in a while. And so overall, like I did like the episode. However, there were some things that I didn't necessarily like. One, of course, is we had the battle, which is action packed at the start, and then like the second half was more information gathering. So it wasn't necessarily as exciting to watch, though needed for the plot. Um, Now, I have mentioned in many series that I have watched that, especially in anime, there seems to be this female character trope, which I tend to call the burden character, which is basically someone who's there to drag everybody else down. And in the case of Bleach, I really feel that that character is Inoue. Like, for example, she and Ishida are going around, they're trying to be sneaky, and then Ishida basically has to grab her back and says, like, quiet, someone's coming. He stays quiet, waits for the group of Shinigami to pass, And then when he's like, okay, now it's safe, we can move on, she's gone. She's gone. And then she leads a whole group of them back to them so that they then end up being chased and their locations given away. And they're now probably going to have to battle at some point. All because she couldn't help herself and just stay there where she was asked to stay. Like, and then it's like, I know she's meant to be dumb. And, I think they tried to maybe think that was funny. But honestly, it's like burdensome to the person that you're with. And obviously, even if she has like her flower power skills or whatever, she's not actively using them. And if you're not going to use them, maybe don't lure 3 large groups of Shinigami to chase you. I didn't like that she was showing her burdensomeness yet again and dragging down Ishida in this case with her, unfortunately, airheadedness. And I mean, it's a trope, it's part of anime. I accept it. Almost every anime has one. But I did not necessarily enjoy that part. The Ganju and Kumachika, I do find their chase and like minor attacks funny, but on the other hand, I also think that that one probably should have finished before Ikaku and Ichigo because, frankly speaking, like it's dragging on a bit. And the fact that it didn't even resolve in this episode, I feel like it's dragging a bit too far. And then, of course, we got a quick check-in with Chad, who's going to follow the smoke to try to meet up with his friends. And then Yoruichi is kind of just doing his own thing on the roofs and stuff. But overall, I found there was a lot to like in the episode, but it also wasn't exciting the whole way through. And was the burden character incident, which for me personally is never enjoyable to see. So I decided to give it just like an average ranking, and I just put it at a 5 out of 10, which then makes the personal rankings so far: Enter the World of the Shinigami, Formation, the worst tag, Penetrate the Center with an enormous bombshell, Assemble the Gotai 13, 14 days before Rukia's execution, The Man Who Hates Shinigami, and then this episode is in 7th, which is Release the Death Blow. And now that brings us to our final segment, series ranking so far. And of course, the first arc under our mostly objective ranking was arc Agent of the Shinigami, and that one scored 84%. And second arc, Soul Society, the Sneak Entry arc, is currently at 60 out of 210. On the personal side, Agent of the Shinigami arc scored 63%, and Soul Society, the Sneak Entry arc, so far has a total of 43 points out of 210. So with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Bleach, Soul Society, the Sneak Entry arc, episode 27, Release the Death Blow. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.